and I swear on everything I hold dear that every word of this story is true. I've never shared it publicly before because honestly, who would believe me? But after carrying it with me for a decade, I feel like I have to tell it. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar. Maybe I'm not as crazy as I've felt all these years. I own a cabin up in the mountains. It's remote, really remote. No neighbors for miles, no cell service, no internet, just me, the trees, and whatever wild animals happen to wander by. I bought the place about 15 years ago when life was rough and I needed somewhere to disappear. The old log cabin sits at the end of a long, overgrown logging road that hasn't been maintained in at least 20 years. You need a high clearance truck just to get there, and even then, winter makes it dangerous. Every December, I make it a tradition to spend a week or two up there, sometimes longer if I can get away from work. There's something about being completely cut off during the holidays that clears my mind. No expectations, no obligations, just the quiet of the mountains and the crackle of the wood stove. I chop firewood. I read. It's my reset button. 10 years ago, I went up there just after Christmas. The forecast called for snow, but nothing serious. I'd weathered plenty of storms up there before. I loaded my truck with enough supplies for 2 weeks. Food, batteries, kerosene for the lanterns, and plenty of firewood was already stacked inside. It's about a 4-hour drive from the main highway. The last hour on that bone-rattling logging road was brutal, but I finally reached the cabin around noon on December 27th. The sky already looked heavy, that thick gray tone that warns snow is coming. I unpacked, lit the stove, and settled in. By nightfall, the first flakes were falling huge, wet ones that stuck to everything. I cooked myself dinner, poured a glass of water, and watched the snow drift past the window. It was perfect, exactly what I needed. The storm raged all night. By morning, snow was nearly a foot deep and still coming down hard. The wind picked up, howling through the trees and rattling the shutters. The snowfall was heavier than expected, but I wasn't worried. I had enough food, fuel, and firewood to last weeks. I spent the day reading by the fire, occasionally glancing outside to watch the storm bury the world. By the second night, the blizzard was in full force. The wind screamed, and the snow came down so thick I could barely see the tree line 40 or 50 yards away. Visibility was almost zero. I kept the fire steady and stayed away from the windows. The cabin was solidly built, but during storms like this, you could feel it creak and groan, a reminder of who really held the power out there. Not me. Around 9 p.m., I was sitting by the fire with a mug of coffee when I heard something. At first, I thought it was just the wind playing tricks, making strange noises as it whipped against the logs. But then I heard it again, a sound like hoo 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 hoo. I don't know how to describe it, almost like a low moan, faintly human, but not quite. It was coming from somewhere outside, near the tree line. I went to the window and peered out into the blizzard. The snow was so dense I couldn't see more than 20 feet ahead, just white noise and shadows. I figured maybe a tree was groaning under the weight of the snow, or maybe some animal was caught in the storm. I went back to my chair and tried to focus on my book. 10 minutes later, the sound came again, louder this time, closer. Still that same low moan, but now there was something else in it. A higher pitch, almost a whine. My first thought was that someone, maybe a lost hiker, was trapped out there. It wouldn't have been the first time someone underestimated these mountains. Every year, people died out here from bad decisions and bad luck. I grabbed my flashlight and went back to the window. I swept the beam across the clearing in front of the cabin, snow swirling everywhere, the light bouncing off white chaos. At first, there was nothing. Then, just at the edge of the light's reach, something moved. Dark shapes, barely visible through the storm. They moved slowly, struggling against the deep snow. Instinct told me to grab my coat and boots, to go out and help. If someone was out there in that weather, they'd freeze to death before morning. I started toward the door, my hand already on the heavy winter coat hanging on the hook, but something made me stop. There was something off about the way those shapes moved. The proportions weren't right, too tall, too broad. Their gait was strange, not quite human. I turned back to the window and shone my flashlight again, squinting through the snow. For just 1 second, the beam caught it clearly. What I saw froze me where I stood. The creature was massive, easily 8 feet tall, maybe more, covered in black hair, matted with snow and ice. It leaned forward as it walked, and that's when I realized it was carrying something. No two somethings. Two smaller figures, cradled under its huge arms. My mind refused to process it. It had to be a trick of the light or someone in a costume. Maybe I was just imagining things. The storm, the isolation, it all messes with your head. But then the wind shifted, and I saw it again. The creature, the Bigfoot, was no more than 30 yards away, trudging straight toward my cabin. The two smaller ones in its arms were also covered in fur, definitely not human. They were small compared to the adult, but still the size of large dogs. Every rational part of me screamed that this couldn't be real. Bigfoot doesn't exist. Everyone knows that. It's just a legend stories people tell with no proof. And yet there it was, moving through the storm toward me, carrying what looked like two Bigfoot infants. A wave of fear hit me so hard it made my vision blur. I've watched enough nature documentaries to know that a mother bear with cubs is the last thing you ever want to stumble upon. She'll fight to the death to protect them, no hesitation. If this Bigfoot was a mother, and she thought I was a threat, I was dead. I dropped the flashlight, lunged for the door, and slammed it shut, sliding the heavy bolt into place. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the bookshelf beside the door and shoved it against the frame. It scraped loudly across the wooden floor, but I didn't care. I needed a barrier, anything between me and whatever was outside. The cabin had 3 windows, 2 by the front door and 1 in the back facing the woods. I ran to the left window, grabbed the small table underneath it, and pressed it up against the glass. Then I piled on whatever I could reach. Books, tools, anything heavy. I did the same to the other front window, using a chair and a box of canned food. The back window was smaller, so I blocked it with a stack of firewood. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Then I stopped and listened. The wind was still howling, but beneath it, there was something else. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps crunching in the snow, getting closer. That low moaning sound came again, louder now. Bigfoot was right outside. I could hear it circling the cabin. Each step thudded deep into the snow, impossibly heavy. Then it stopped by the front window. Something brushed against the glass. I held my breath. The footsteps moved again, this time around the side of the cabin. And then, I heard the sound that still haunts me to this day, a deep, rumbling moan that vibrated through the walls. It didn't sound angry or aggressive. It sounded exhausted, worn down, desperate, like something that had pushed itself beyond its limits and had nothing left. Then I heard the smaller ones. Their cries were high-pitched, almost like puppies whining or babies crying in the cold. Those faint, fragile sounds, almost swallowed by the wind, were cold and terrified. They went straight through me. Footsteps echoed in front of the cabin. I heard them stop right at the door. For a long, suspended moment, there was only the wind and the weak cries of the Bigfoot infants. Then there came 3 deliberate knocks, measured, purposeful. Not the frantic pounding of something trying to force its way in, but a knock as if someone were asking permission to enter. Another low moan came from the large Bigfoot, even more exhausted than before. And then a sound that chilled me to the bone. A hoarse, guttural syllable, almost not language, but its meaning was unmistakable. The Bigfoot uttered a single word through the door. Help. I froze in the middle of the cabin, staring at the barricaded door. The Bigfoot had spoken. It had used a human word. It was begging for help. Everything I had assumed about what was outside collapsed right then. This was not a wild animal scavenging for food or shelter. This was an intelligent being, capable of communication, capable of asking for aid, capable of knocking. The small Bigfoot cries grew louder. These were not the fierce snarls of a predator. They were the desperate wails of children in pain. They sounded hollow and frightened. I could hear them trembling, their tiny bodies likely convulsing with hypothermia. I stood there in the cabin, my mind racing. Every instinct urged me to stay put. Ride out the storm, do not open that door. If I opened it, and the adult Bigfoot attacked, I was finished. It was massive, 3 or 4 times my size, strong enough to tear me apart without breaking a sweat. I had a hunting rifle in the cabin, but it was in the back room. Even if I could reach it, I wasn't sure a firearm would stop something that big if it chose to attack. But those sounds, the crying of those newborns, were dying out there. They were only infants, freezing to death. And the adult Bigfoot, because by now I was certain it was their mother, had trudged through a blizzard to my door and begged for help. She had asked for mercy. Somewhere in whatever way Bigfoot understood, She had learned that humans could offer shelter and warmth. I had never been particularly brave. I was no hero. But as I listened to those small cries and to that hoarse plea, I knew I couldn't stand by and let them perish right outside my home. It was reckless. It might be the stupidest thing I ever did, but it was the only thing I could do. I crossed to the door and began pulling the bookshelf away. It was heavy. I had wedged it tightly, but I managed to drag it a few inches. My hands shook as I reached for the bolt. I took a deep breath, muttered a quick prayer to whatever might be listening, and slid the bolt open. I eased the door outward. It squealed. The wind immediately tore at the opening, and snow rushed into the cabin. I braced my hands on the door and pushed it wider. The Bigfoot stood there in the doorway, so tall she had to hunch down for me to see her. Snow and ice clung to her fur, making her look even more enormous. Her face was hard to make out in the swirl of white, but I could see her eyes large, dark, and unmistakably intelligent. She didn't look at me like a wild animal looks at a human. She looked at me the way a desperate mother looks at another person pleading for help. She held the two infants tight against her chest. They were tiny compared to her little tufts of fur, barely moving. They had stopped crying. That was worse. Silence meant they were shutting down, giving up. For a moment, we simply stared at one another. I could see hesitation and fear reflected in her eyes. She feared me as much as I feared her. But she had come this far and had asked for help because her young needed it. Then she did something that broke me. She bent down, lowering that massive head of hers, and gently, carefully passed both infants through the doorway into my cabin. She handled them with such careful tenderness, laying them on the floor inside before straightening. She looked at me again. What I did not expect was the next thing. She bowed. Not a bob of the head, an honest, humble bow, lowering that enormous head in what could only be read as gratitude. I looked at the two little Bigfoot on the floor. They were nearly motionless, chests rising in shallow, weak breaths. Their fur was wet and matted. They trembled uncontrollably. They wouldn't last long without warmth. I looked back at the mother in the doorway, hunched against the wind and snow, and made my decision. I stepped away from the door and motioned her inside. I gestured toward the warmth, the fire in the stove, the safe air of the cabin. The mother watched me warily, her dark eyes searching my face for a sign of danger or a trap. I took a step back and kept my hands visible, showing the most non-threatening posture I could manage. I gestured again, this time more urgently. The Bigfoot mother looked down at her two infants lying on the floor, then back at me. Her babies were inside the warm cabin now. Instinct must have been warring within her, the need to protect her young against the fear of trusting me. At last, she took a step forward. Even then, she had to crouch deeply to fit through the door. When she finally entered, she filled the room so tall that her head nearly brushed the ceiling. I shut the door behind her quickly, sealing out the storm and the howling wind. For a few moments, we just stood there, the massive creature and me in the tiny cabin that suddenly felt even smaller. She was only about 6 feet away, close enough that I could smell her, a heavy, musky scent mixed with wet fur, earth, and something wilder I couldn't name. She was panting hard, trembling all over, whether from cold, exhaustion, or both. Her breathing came in ragged bursts. The two little ones still lay near the door, almost motionless. I needed to help them immediately, but I didn't dare make any sudden moves. I slowly gestured toward the infants, then toward the wood stove, hoping she'd understand that I wanted to bring them closer to the fire. The mother watched me closely, but didn't intervene. I knelt beside the tiny Bigfoot babies, and up close I could see how bad things were. Their fur was soaked, their small faces crusted with ice. Their lips, if you could call them that, had turned bluish. They were in the final stages of hypothermia. I reached out carefully and touched one of them. Its fur was stiff with ice, and it barely responded to my touch. That was bad, so weak it couldn't even flinch. I looked up at the mother. Every muscle in her body was tight. I could see the conflict in her eyes. She wanted me to help, but her instincts must have been screaming not to let a stranger near her young. I moved very slowly, keeping my eyes on her, and gently lifted one of the infants. It was heavier than I expected, maybe 30 or 40 pounds, but limp and cold in my arms. The mother rumbled deep in her chest, a low, vibrating sound, but she didn't move to stop me. I carried the baby to the stove and laid it on a thick rug in front of the fire. The heat was intense there, but that was exactly what it needed. Then I went back for the second one, just as carefully. The mother tracked my every move, her dark eyes locked on her children. Once both were close to the fire, I grabbed a few towels from a supply box and began gently drying them, trying to wick away as much moisture as possible. The mother stepped closer, looming over me. For a second, I thought she might lash out, but she only stood there, making soft, rhythmic rumbles, maybe to comfort the little ones. The babies began to stir. Their shivering grew stronger, which was actually a good sign. It meant their bodies were starting to fight the cold again. One of them made a small sound, a faint whimper, and immediately the mother moved beside me. She knelt, placing one enormous hand tenderly against the baby's face. The gentleness in that gesture, coming from something so powerful, was breathtaking. I kept working, drying the second baby as best I could. The mother didn't interfere, just watched, and sometimes touched her young as if to reassure herself they were still alive. After about 20 minutes, both infants were noticeably more alert. They were still weak, still trembling, but their color had improved, and they were beginning to make soft noises, high, chirping sounds, almost like little birds. The mother gathered them into her arms, and I stepped back to give them space. She sat down heavily against the wall, cradling her babies against her chest. I could see what looked like relief on her face, if that's the right word for it. The infants burrowed into her thick fur, and she wrapped her long arms around them protectively. It was the first time I truly saw her up close. Standing straight, she must have been around 8 feet tall, with shoulders as broad as a refrigerator. Her fur was a deep brown, almost black, in places thick, coarse, and wild. Her face was harder to describe. Not quite ape, not quite human, something in between. Her brow was heavy, her nose broad and flat, her mouth wide with large teeth, though she never bared them at me. Her hands were enormous, the fingers thick as sausages, palms the size of dinner plates, and yet, despite their power, she handled her babies with astonishing tenderness. The infants were like smaller, rounder versions of her shorter limbs, softer faces, pudgy bodies. They had that universal baby look that tugs at your heart, though I doubt anyone else would ever call baby Bigfoot cute. At that moment, though, they looked just like frightened, freezing children who needed help. I realized I was still standing there staring. The mother stared back. We needed some kind of understanding if this was going to work. Slowly, I raised my hands, palms forward, a gesture of peace. Then I pointed to myself and said softly, "Friend, I'm your friend. I want to help." I had no idea whether she understood any English beyond the one word she'd spoken at the door, but she tilted her head slightly, watching me, and I sensed she was at least trying to comprehend. I pointed to the babies, mimed warming them with my hands, then pointed to the fire. She seemed to get it because she nodded. Actually nodded, like a person. That simple motion raised more questions than I could even begin to process, but it confirmed what I'd already suspected. These beings were intelligent far more than animals. They could communicate, reason, maybe even understand language to some degree. This wasn't like having a bear in my cabin. This was something entirely different. I moved slowly around the cabin, pretending to busy myself, trying to seem non-threatening. I needed to keep the fire strong, so I opened the stove and added more logs. The mother watched me, but made no move to stop me that I took as a good sign. The infants were growing drowsy, their eyes fluttering shut as the warmth soaked in. The crisis seemed to be over. They would live. But now, I had a new problem. I had 3 Bigfoots in my cabin, and no idea what to do next. We couldn't just sit there staring at each other all night. I needed to find some kind of routine, some way for all of us to coexist in this small space without fear or harm. I decided to try feeding them. I had no clue what Bigfoot ate, but I guessed they might be omnivorous, like bears. I went to my food box and pulled out what I could offer: some dried fruit, a handful of nuts, strips of beef jerky, and a granola bar. I placed all the food carefully on a plate and slowly approached the Bigfoot mother, holding it out in front of me. I set it down on the floor about 3 feet from her and stepped back. She looked at the food, then at me, then back at the food. Her expression was wary, and I couldn't blame her. To reassure her, I mimed taking a bite, raising my hand to my mouth and pretending to chew, hoping she'd understand it was safe. Bigfoot watched me for a long moment before reaching out and picking up a piece of dried apple. She sniffed it cautiously, turned it over in her huge fingers, then ate it. Her face, and yes, I know I'm humanizing her, seemed to show surprise and maybe even pleasure. She reached for more, sampling a handful of nuts and some jerky. The baby Bigfoots perked up the instant they saw their mother eating. They chirped softly and reached for the food. The mother carefully broke small pieces off, dividing them into baby-sized portions. It was a surreal sight, this massive, wild creature feeding her children with the same gentleness as any human mother. I sat across the cabin, near the chair by the stove, trying to look calm. Between bites, she kept glancing at me, still cautious but not aggressive. We settled into an uneasy silence, broken only by the crackling fire and the wind screaming outside. The storm was still raging, and I realized we were all trapped here together until it passed. As night fell, the tension inside the cabin slowly eased. The baby Bigfoots drifted off to sleep, curled in their mother's arms. The mother's eyes opened and closed, fighting exhaustion. She looked utterly spent. I had no idea how far she'd carried them through that storm miles, surely. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up slowly and went to the back room to fetch one of the spare blankets. The mother's eyes snapped open, tracking my every move. I held the blanket up and mimed sleeping, resting my head on my hand. Then, step by step, I walked toward her and offered it. She looked at the blanket, then at me. Cautiously, she reached out and took it. In her massive hands, the thick blanket looked like a hand towel. She studied it for a moment, rubbing it between her fingers as if testing the texture. Then she did something that stopped me cold. She spread the blanket gently over her babies, tucking it around them the way a human mother would. She even tucked in the edges to keep them snug and covered. Despite the madness of the situation, I found myself smiling. I went back to my chair, pulled another blanket over myself, and sat down. I was exhausted but unsure if it was wise to sleep in the same cabin as a Bigfoot family. What if she decided I was a threat while I was unconscious? What if she attacked in the night? But exhaustion eventually won. The mother seemed to accept that I wasn't a danger, at least for now. She leaned back against the wall, her children safe beneath the blanket I'd given them. Her eyes were closed, though I could tell from her breathing that she wasn't in a deep sleep. She was resting but alert. I closed my own eyes. The warmth of the fire, the muffled roar of the storm outside, and the emotional exhaustion of the night finally pulled me under. My last thought before drifting off was that I might die in my sleep, killed by a Bigfoot, and no one would ever find my body or believe what had happened. When I woke, pale morning light was filtering through the window. The storm was still going, but it had lost its fury. The wind had quieted, and the snow fell softly now, not in blinding sheets. I lay still for a moment, slowly remembering where I was and what had happened. The Bigfoot mother was awake, watching me from across the cabin. Our eyes met, and for a long moment we just stared at each other. I could feel her studying me, weighing, judging. Was I still safe? Could she trust me? I kept my expression calm, non-threatening, breathing slow and steady. Finally, she seemed to decide I wasn't a problem. She looked down at her babies, still curled beneath the blanket, sound asleep, peaceful, safe. She reached out one huge finger and stroked the head of one of them, brushing through its soft fur. I decided to start the morning with routine, anything to make the situation feel more normal. I rose slowly, careful not to startle her. She watched but didn't move. I went to the stove, added a few logs, and stirred the coals to life. Then I rummaged through my supplies for breakfast oats, dried fruit, a bit of honey. I cooked a large pot of oatmeal on the stove, adding water to stretch it. I had no idea if Bigfoot ate oatmeal, but it was warm, filling, and easy to share. While it simmered, I laid out some dried fruit, nuts, and bread. I made 2 servings, one in my usual bowl, and another larger portion on a plate for the Bigfoot family. I set the plate down in the same spot as the night before and went back to my chair to eat. The mother watched everything I did, curiosity flickering in her eyes. When I began eating, she leaned down and gently roused the babies. They chirped sleepily, stretching their small limbs from beneath the blanket. She pointed toward the food, and they immediately perked up. The family ate together, the mother making sure the little ones were full before taking more for herself. The babies seemed to love the oatmeal, even though they ate it messily, scooping handfuls into their mouths. The mother didn't seem to mind the chaos. Occasionally, she wiped their faces with her giant hand, a strangely tender gesture. After breakfast, it was time to address the elephant or Bigfoot in the room. We were stuck here together until the storm passed, maybe hours, maybe days. We needed some kind of order, some boundaries, some system for coexisting. I started by pointing to different parts of the cabin, trying to designate space. I pointed to my chair and the area around it, then to myself, suggesting that was my space. Then I gestured toward their corner by the stove, indicating that was theirs. The Bigfoot mother watched me with what I think might have been curiosity. When I finished, she looked around her area, then back at me and nodded. Actually nodded. We understood each other. I had my space, they had theirs. It wasn't much, but it was something. The day passed slowly. Outside, the storm continued, piling snow higher and higher against the windows. Inside, we fell into an odd kind of rhythm. I kept the fire going and prepared food. The mother watched me constantly, but she looked more at ease now. The babies began to explore a little, still clinging to her, but clearly stronger and livelier after surviving the night. At one point, one of the little ones wandered a few steps toward my bookshelf, curiosity winning over caution. It sniffed the shelf, then reached out a tiny finger to touch one of the books. I couldn't help but chuckle. The mother gave a soft, rumbling call, and the little one scurried back to her side, but I'd seen the curiosity there. They weren't mindless beasts. They were intelligent, inquisitive, and full of personality. Around midday, the mother made a sound I hadn't heard before, a deep, vibrating growl. She looked at me, then gestured toward the window, mimed sleeping. It took me a moment to realize what she meant. She was asking if we were staying here, if this was where we'd sleep again tonight. She was planning ahead, thinking beyond the present moment. I nodded and pointed toward the storm still raging outside, trying to convey that yes, we were stuck here until it passed. She seemed to understand and leaned back against the wall, visibly satisfied. As the afternoon faded into evening, I found myself feeling something I hadn't expected at all: calm. For the first time, being in that cabin with a family of Bigfoot didn't feel terrifying. It felt strangely peaceful. The Bigfoot mother showed no aggression, and the young ones were, in their own strange way, utterly adorable. They played like puppies or kittens, tumbling across the cabin floor, chirping and squealing with joy. The mother watched them with what I could only describe as maternal affection, occasionally reaching out to pull one back when it wandered too close to something that might be dangerous. I decided to interact with them a little. I rolled a makeshift ball, really just a pair of socks bundled together, toward one of the infants. It eyed the ball curiously, then picked it up and examined it. Instead of tossing it back to me, it threw it to its sibling, who caught it and lobbed it in return. They were playing catch, inside my cabin. I sat there watching two baby Bigfoots play catch with my rolled-up socks, and for the first time in my life, I laughed in pure disbelief. The mother watched the game, and I swear her expression softened. Maybe I was projecting, seeing what I wanted to see, but I think she looked happy, maybe even proud, watching her children play and thrive. That night, I cooked a heartier meal: rice and beans with some canned vegetables, seasoned simply with salt and pepper. I made enough for everyone and divided it onto plates. The Bigfoot family ate eagerly, though the mother still made sure her children ate first before finishing the rest. When darkness fell and the cabin dimmed, I lit an oil lamp. The warm, flickering glow filled the room, and I saw the mother watching the flame closely. She reached a massive hand toward it, then pulled back as if she understood the danger, but still, she seemed mesmerized. I wondered if Bigfoot ever used fire in the wild. Maybe that was why she came to my cabin in the first place, drawn by the smoke curling from the chimney, connecting it somehow with warmth, safety, and life. How much did they really understand about human civilization? As the night deepened, we all settled into our spaces. I handed the family another blanket. I had a few spares, and they made a kind of nest, curling together beneath the covers. The babies nestled into their mother's side, all of them huddled beneath the blanket. The mother watched me prepare my own bed, her intelligent eyes tracking every move. Just before I lay down, I did something impulsive. I walked slowly toward them, careful not to startle her. The mother tensed, watching me approach. When I was a few steps away, I stopped and gave a small wave, just a friendly gesture, a simple goodnight. The Bigfoot mother stared at me for a long time. Then slowly she raised one enormous hand and waved back. The gesture was awkward, uncertain, like she was mimicking something she'd seen before but didn't fully understand. But she did it. Bigfoot waved goodnight. I returned to my simple cot in the corner, pulled up my blanket, and lay down. The cabin was warm, the fire crackled softly, and though the storm still roared outside, inside it was peaceful, safe. I drifted to sleep to the sound of the Bigfoot family's soft, steady breathing across the room. By morning, the storm had finally passed. Sunlight streamed through the window, glinting off the snow, and the silence outside was absolute. No wind, no falling snow, just a perfect, motionless calm. I sat up and looked at the Bigfoot family. They were awake, the mother gazing out the window where the light poured in. Her face, if I wasn't imagining it, showed something like relief. I rose and joined her at the window. The world outside had transformed overnight. Snow blanketed everything 3 feet deep, maybe more. It was beautiful, pure, untouched, and perilous. Even for a creature as large and powerful as the Bigfoot mother, crossing that snow with 2 small ones would be brutal. I turned back to her. She stood hunched beneath the low ceiling, the babies now awake, peering out at the glittering landscape. I could see her thinking, deciding whether to leave now or wait for the thaw. I had no idea what she would choose. I made breakfast, as I had the day before. Oatmeal, fruit, bread. We ate together in quiet companionship. The little ones were full of energy now, completely recovered from their ordeal. They roamed the cabin more boldly, exploring everything. One even toddled close enough to sniff my leg with its wet nose before darting back to its mother. After breakfast, the mother stood near the door and looked at me. She pointed toward the exit, then down at her children. I understood she was asking if it was safe to leave. I went to the window, looked at the deep snow, then back at her. I hesitated, then gestured with my hand, a wavering motion that meant maybe. It would be hard, but possible if she was careful. She seemed to accept that. She gathered her babies, one under each massive arm, just as she had carried them the night she arrived. But before leaving, she paused and looked at me again. Then she set the little ones down and took a few steps toward me. I stayed still, though my heart was pounding. Up close, her sheer size and strength were overwhelming, but there was no menace in her movement. Instead, she reached out and placed one enormous hand gently on my shoulder. The weight was solid and heavy, but the touch itself was gentle, deliberate. She looked me in the eye, and I saw something there. Gratitude, respect, maybe even affection. Then she withdrew her hand and stepped back. She lifted her children again, cradling them against her chest. I moved to the door and opened it. Cold air rushed in. The Bigfoot family moved toward the light. The mother ducked low to fit through the doorway, then straightened once outside, towering against the white expanse. I stood in the doorway watching them. The infants glanced back at me, their small faces barely visible in their mother's arms. The Bigfoot mother turned for one last look. She raised a single hand, not a wave this time, but a silent farewell. I lifted my own hand in return. Then she turned and began to walk toward the forest, her dark figure growing smaller against the endless white. The Bigfoot's footprints were enormous, each step pressed deep into the snow. I watched until the family disappeared into the trees, swallowed by the white wilderness. Even after they were gone, I could still trace their path in the powder, leading upward into the mountains, back to the wild. I stood in the doorway long after they'd vanished, staring at those tracks. Part of me couldn't believe what had just happened. Another part of me wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing, if the footprints were real or just a trick of the mind. But the snow tracked inside the cabin was real. The empty food tins were real. I shut the door and looked around. The cabin felt hollow now, too still, too quiet. For 2 days, I had shared this tiny space with 3 living, breathing Bigfoots. And now that they were gone, I could feel their absence like a weight in the air. Then I noticed something that stopped me in my tracks. The blankets I'd given them. They'd been folded neatly, stacked beside the spot where the family had slept. The Bigfoot mother had folded them before she left. That's when it truly hit me. They weren't animals. Different, yes, but not beasts. They were people, in their own way. Intelligent, deliberate, compassionate. They understood communication, gratitude, even order. The mother had come to my cabin for help, had knocked, had spoken a word, had trusted me. She'd cared for her children with tenderness, shared food, and tidied up before leaving. I spent the rest of that day going through my usual motions, chopping wood, checking supplies, but I couldn't stop thinking about them. My eyes kept drifting to the window, to the line of trees where their tracks vanished. I half expected to see them reappear. They never did. They were gone back to wherever they belonged, back to the wilderness. That night, I sat by the fire with a glass of whiskey, trying to make sense of it all. Who could I possibly tell? Who would ever believe me? I had no photos, no recordings, just my word and some footprints that would vanish as soon as the next snowfall came. And honestly, did I even want to tell anyone? What would happen if the world knew Bigfoot was real? What would happen to that mother and her young if people came searching for them? That night, I made my decision. I would keep their secret. It wasn't my story to share. The Bigfoot mother had trusted me, asked for help, and I had given it. In return, I would protect them. A few days later, the skies cleared. The world was bright and frozen, sunlight glinting off the snow. I stayed another week as planned, but everything felt different now. I kept glancing at the tree line, wondering if I'd see them again. Every night, I left food on the porch, dried fruit, nuts, bread, hoping they might come back. Each morning, the food was gone. Maybe birds had taken it. Maybe squirrels. Maybe the Bigfoot family. I chose to believe it was them. When it was finally time to pack up and leave, I did one last thing. I gathered the remaining food, everything that wouldn't spoil, and hiked about a mile into the woods, following the path they'd taken. Under a large pine, I found a flat rock and laid the food there. Then I took a stick and drew in the snow. A simple picture, one large figure, two small ones, and me. I circled all of us together. A family, or maybe just friends. I don't know if the Bigfoot mother ever found it, or if she could understand what it meant, but I needed to do it. Then I returned to my life. Back to work, back to civilization, cars, screens, schedules, the endless hum of normal life, but I was not the same. I carried that experience with me everywhere. Sometimes, when I'm stuck in traffic or zoning out in a dull meeting, I think back to those 2 days in the mountains with the firelight, the storm, and the family that shouldn't exist, and I smile. Because I know something almost no one else does. I know they're real. I know they're still out there, and I know they're not monsters. They're people in their own quiet way. Every December since then, 10 years now, I go back to that same cabin. And every year, I do the same thing. I leave food on the porch each night. Some years it disappears, some years it doesn't. I've never seen the Bigfoot family again, never heard them, never found fresh tracks. But I still hope. I still look. A few years ago, I added something new to my ritual. Blankets. Thick, warm, high-quality ones. I fold them neatly and leave them in a safe corner of the porch. They always disappear. Something takes them. I don't know if it's the Bigfoot family or some other creature scavenging for nesting material, but I like to believe it's them. I like to imagine those two infants are grown now. Maybe they have children of their own and that they remember. Maybe they tell their young, in whatever way Bigfoot communicate, about the human who helped them on a freezing night long ago. Or maybe they never think of me at all. But I think of them, and last year, something happened that convinced me they still remember too. It was December again, my yearly trip. I'd been at the cabin about a week when, one morning, I opened the door and found something waiting on the porch. I hadn't heard a sound all night, no footsteps, no approach, but there it was. A small structure made from sticks and pine boughs, woven together into the shape of a basket. Inside were acorns, pine cones, and what looked like preserved wild berries. I knew immediately what it was. A gift. Someone or something had left me a gift. It was crude by human standards, but crafted with clear care. The sticks had been selected carefully, woven deliberately, the contents arranged neatly inside. This wasn't the work of random wildlife. This was made by an intelligent hand with purpose. I lifted the basket gently, almost reverently. My hands were shaking. I looked out toward the woods, scanning the silent trees. Nothing moved. No shapes, No sound, just stillness and snow. But I knew they were out there, maybe watching, maybe already gone. But they remembered. After all these years, they still remembered. I still have that basket. It sits on a shelf in my apartment where I can see it every day. No one who visits me knows what it really is. To them, it just looks like a rustic craft piece, something I might have bought at a local market. But I know the truth. It's a thank you gift from a Bigfoot family I once helped survive the storm 10 winters ago. That basket was the proof that what happened was real, a reminder that this world still holds wonders most people will never see or believe in. I share this story now because I've grown old, and I don't want it to die with me. Someone needs to know what happened. Someone needs to know that they are real, that they're still out there, and that they are not what we've always thought. They aren't monsters or animals to be hunted, captured, or studied. They are people different from us, yes, but people nonetheless, with families, feelings, and intelligence. If you're reading this and don't believe me, I understand. I wouldn't have believed it either if it hadn't happened to me, but I'm telling you the truth, strange as it sounds. For 2 days in December, 10 years ago, I shared my cabin with a mother Bigfoot and her 2 children, and it changed my life forever. And if someday you find yourself out there in the mountains, in a cabin, or anywhere wild, and you hear something outside on a stormy night, if you hear a knock on your door, followed by a desperate voice asking for help, open it. Show them kindness, the same kindness they showed me when they trusted me with their lives. Show them that not all humans are a threat. Because somewhere out there, in those deep forests and high mountains where few people ever go, they are living their lives, raising their young, surviving against the odds, simply trying to exist in a world that refuses to believe they exist. And maybe, just maybe, there's still room in this world for all of us, humans and them. Every December, I still return to that cabin. I still leave food and blankets. I still look toward the trees, hoping to see those familiar, towering figures emerge from the woods. Maybe I never will. Maybe that one encounter was all I'll ever have. But it's enough. More than enough. That's all there is. For more extraordinary stories, follow us.